with that, folks, we're going to be now joined by our friend, Article 3 Project founder, Mike Davis. Mike, good to have you back on the show, man.
Thank you for having me.
So, a lot to talk about this week. I mean, this one's sort of right up your alley. But Politico reported this weekend that Joe Biden is really upset that, his protectors over at the DOJ and his very own Merrick Garland didn't indict my father earlier, didn't already have him on the stand, didn't put him away for 1,000 years already. How is that not evidence of election interference? I mean, they're saying these things, they're doing it, but it seems like that's like beyond the pale, even for what the Democrats could get away with. I mean, this is insanity.
Yeah, I mean, it's very obvious that these indictments against President Trump are part of President Biden and the Democrats' lawfare and election interference against Trump because they fear they can't beat him on November 5th, 2024, after their 2 bogus impeachments, their 4 bogus indictments for non-crimes, their illegal, unconstitutional gag orders. They're trying to bankrupt Trump with this civil fraud lawsuit with Tish James in New York for the non-fraud of a businessman paying back sophisticated Wall Street banks as agreed on time with interest. You have these crazy plaintiffs like Jean Carroll bringing defamation lawsuits for sexual assaults that never happened. She named her cat Vagina, and she said that rape was sexy, and we're supposed to believe this nut job. And then the Democrats, through their legal Hail Mary that was just before the Supreme Court, they know that their lawfare is backfiring badly, and propelling President Trump back to the White House. So they went to the Supreme Court to just take President Trump off the ballot, to disqualify him so the American people do not have a choice. And I am very happy, after 19 months of fighting this fight every day with the Article 3 Project, that the American people are waking up to this Democrat lawfare and election interference.
Yeah, so, there's a lot, we sort of went into like 3 topics there, and I want to get into all of them in detail, but it also seems like, as it relates to Merrick Garland and Joe Biden's hopes for it, I mean, it sort of feels like they're stating the obvious, which we all know, and probably most of the people watching, that this was their plan all along. Like, it feels like it really undercuts all the nonsense that even the Democrats are out there kind of creating. Like, oh no, these things are real. I mean, you see the Fannie Willis falling apart. You see New York falling apart. It doesn't matter because it's New York, and Fannie Willis, it may not matter because that's Georgia. And those were chosen venues on purpose, for obvious reasons. But, was this just clearly the plan all along, or was this just one of many plans and or backup plans?
Well, there is evidence that President Biden is directly involved with all 4 of these indictments. It was Matthew Colangelo who got sent from the number 3 office in the Biden Justice Department to go to Soros-funded Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg's office to resuscitate a zombie case against President Trump for the non-felony of settling a nuisance claim. And this theory that they're pursuing now in New York was passed over by the prior Manhattan DA, the U.S. Attorney, the Federal Election Commission, and Alvin Bragg himself before this Biden political appointee, Matthew Colangelo, went to the Manhattan DA's office to bring the first indictment ever against a former president, right, and a likely future president. And then you saw with Jack Smith's 2 indictments, one for having presidential records and the office of former president, which is allowed by the Presidential Records Act. It was Jonathan Sue, Biden's deputy White House counsel, who worked behind the scenes with the National Archives to waive President Trump's constitutional claim of executive privilege, which led to the unnecessary, unlawful, unprecedented raid on President Trump for presidential records he's allowed to have under the Presidential Records Act. And then you see this evidence that Joe Biden has been putting pressure on Merrick Garland to move forward with these prosecutions. Remember, before these prosecutions, before Biden brought these prosecutions. Biden leaked in another story that Merrick Garland was acting too much like a professor and not a partisan attorney general, which is what Biden won. And so Merrick Garland moved forward with more prosecutions. You saw down in Georgia with Fani Willis. She sent her boyfriend, she paid her secret boyfriend to meet with the Biden White House, including the Biden White House counsel, before she brought her bogus criminal charges for her racketeering or RICO charges down in Fulton County, Georgia. So you have Joe Biden and his White House with its fingerprints on all 4 of these criminal prosecutions.
So what do you do about that, right? I mean, it's pretty clear. It's obvious it's happening. If this was Donald Trump, what would be, Congress? I mean, what's the proper steps to actually go after him for this? Because, and at least find out. I mean, he's entitled to due process like anyone else, but it feels like if anyone other than the Democrat elite even sniffed around these things. I mean, they basically tried impeaching my father for what was a perfectly good phone call. It didn't stop them because it didn't matter. Nancy Pelosi had the votes. They realized that the facts set didn't line up, and that it was too late. They already started the process, so they're going to just push it through anyway. It doesn't really matter. I mean, what do you do in this case? Because it feels like, again, this is yet another example of them just having flagrant disregard for the Constitution.
Well, there's a lot you can do, and there's a lot that House Republicans can be doing and should be doing. Jim Jordan, the House Judiciary Committee chairman, has sent some oversight letters to these different prosecutors, and that's good. That he's issued subpoenas. It's time to haul in Jack Smith and Alvin Bragg and Fani Willis and Tish James and these other Democrat prosecutors and these Democrat hellholes who think they get to decide the next presidential election instead of the American people. Hold them before Congress and make them explain this coordination with the Biden White House, with President Biden and his White House team. Make them explain their coordination with the Biden Justice Department, including Matthew Colangelo, the Biden White House, Jonathan Sue, the meeting with Nathan Wade, Fani Willis's boyfriend / special prosecutor who billed for 2 meetings with the Biden White House, including the White House counsel. Make them come into the House of Representatives, bring their documents, make them explain. Another thing that House Republicans should do is include on these must-pass appropriations bills that no federal funds can be used for a prosecution of any major presidential candidates on or before November 5th, 2024. And any state or local government that prosecutes any major presidential candidate on or before November 5th, 2024, loses all federal funding. These are unprecedented indictments against a former and likely future president. This is obviously lawfare. It's obviously election interference. And guess what? The American people, not these Democrat prosecutors and these Democrat hellholes like New York, D.C., and Atlanta, get to pick our president.
Yeah, I mean, so... obviously the House I guess they've subpoenaed Fani Willis. She didn't take, subpoenas, so I guess they had to send U.S. attorneys over there to actually deal with it. But, there seems like there's other angles as well that they perhaps have not yet started. And, we're not the best at going sort of on the offense, but I feel like they really should be. What are the other places they should be going and doing? Because, Fani Willis is a start, but, you got 10 months. I don't think you're going to get much by the time the Democrats stall everything and they play their games and, they'll drag everything to the last minute. Then they'll figure out a reason to start the clock again and drag it out.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has done is she has sent a criminal referral to Georgia Governor Brian Kemp and Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr, asking them to follow their statutory duty and open a criminal probe on Fani Willis, because the allegations are pretty clear that she illegally hired her secret unqualified boyfriend, and she was paying him $250 an hour, over $700,000 and counting, to pursue this political prosecution against President Trump. And she was taking illegal kickbacks from this illegal deal with her secret boyfriend. And these kickbacks included these lavish trips around the world. They went to Napa, they went to the Caribbean, maybe elsewhere. Governor Kemp and Attorney General Chris Carr are running and hiding, which you would expect from these cowards, but they need to follow their statutory duty and order a criminal probe here. I know they don't like Trump, but guess what? They still have a constitutional duty as the governor and as the Attorney General.
Yeah, I mean, how is it that they can even hide from that? I mean, listen, it's not like this is even remote. Like, these are reported facts. They're out there. Congress is investigating it. I mean, how can they run and hide from this one? It seems insane. I mean, I guess if they want to maybe pursue a career as being, Democrat henchmen, maybe that's right. But if you're a Republican governor, a Republican AG in a state like Georgia, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and they look, Fannie Willis and Nathan Wade have already been caught lying to the courts about when their relationship started.
Yeah.
They're trying to claim their relationship started after she hired him. I don't think that makes a difference because she's still profiting from the prosecution. She started this relationship before the indictment. But even still, they lied about this. They said that the relationship started later than it did, and they came back with more evidence that actually they were taking these trips. They had this relationship before they claimed. That they are making materially false statements to the courts. How is that not perjury? How are they not opening a criminal probe today on perjury with Fannie Willis and Nathan Wade, her secret boyfriends? Not so secret anymore.
Yeah. I mean, all of this stuff's crazy, but I got to ask you, what did you think about Robert Hur's report? I mean, if Joe Biden was literally anyone else, it's clear, and it basically says that he'd have been charged criminally with mishandling classified documents. And yet, it seems like, it's okay. He's of slight mind. We know this. He's basically senile. We know this. It's all good. If he's going to be cleared for being senile, fine. But how does he remain president?
So remember how Robert Hur became the special counsel. It was President Biden having these secret discussions with his lawyers and the Biden Justice Department after he got caught with 5 stashes of stolen classified records from his time as vice president and his time even as U.S. Senator, which is very difficult for Joe Biden to explain how he got those records because he stole them out of a skiff, right? So They had these 5 sets of stolen classified records, moved several times, unguarded for at least 2.5 years that Joe Biden didn't have Secret Service protection after he left the vice president's office before he got protection as a presidential candidate, accessible by their Chinese agent and almost certainly used by Hunter and Joe to secure millions of dollars in Burisma funding and probably more. And so obvious evidence of espionage, obvious evidence of foreign bribery and corruption. They had this secret arrangement. They got caught during the time of this secret arrangement. The Biden Justice Department organized this unnecessary, unlawful, unprecedented raid on Trump for records he's allowed to have under the Presidential Records Act. It was a total distraction from Biden's own prop. So Merrick Garland gets caught with an obvious conflict where he can't investigate his boss, especially after his Justice Department is cooperating with his boss. So who do they pick? They pick Robert Hur. Robert Hur is the protege of Rod Rosenstein and Chris Wray and James Comey and that cabal. When I was the chief counsel for nominations on the Senate Judiciary Committee, I held up Rob Hur's nomination because I knew that he was part of that deep state cabal. He was the Maryland senator's pick. He was Rod Rosenstein's pick. And so I knew that when Merrick Garland picked Rob Hur to be this special counsel, and they said, oh, he was a Trump U.S. attorney in Maryland. Yeah, technically he was, but he was picked by both Democrat senators in Maryland, which is the tradition of the Senate for more than 100 years, that home state senators pick the U.S. attorneys, U.S. marshals, and district court judges. I knew that Robert Hur wasn't going to do a damn thing about Biden. So we have clear evidence that Joe Biden broke the law. He committed espionage. And guess what Robert Hur says? Well, he might be a criminal, but he's a lovable, demented criminal, so we can't prosecute him. Robert Hur completely protected Joe Biden, but because Robert Hur said the obvious, that Joe Biden has lost his mind, the Democrats are going ballistic on Robert Hur, even though Robert Hur didn't recommend felony charges against Joe Biden like he should have.
Yeah, how do they have it both ways? I keep seeing that, right? No, Joe Biden doesn't have dementia. He's very lucid. I saw one that went as far as to say, behind closed doors in the White House, it's known that Joe Biden runs circles around these young Ivy League educated politicos that work there. I'm like, wait. Like, he's a genius, guys. He's a genius behind closed doors. But magically, it seems that every time he steps out of those closed doors, I don't know, the genius has been used up. He went to a level, he's just too tired to go. The genius was so powerful that he is drained, and we see a bumbling imbecile each and every time he appears somewhere. I mean, it's crazy, but I'm listening to them. I'm like, well, if he's not senile, if he's not these things, then shouldn't he be charged?
Yeah, and maybe the Trump 47 Justice Department should charge him. If they claim that he's mentally competent to stand trial, then great. The Trump 47 Justice Department can charge him for espionage and for obstruction of justice and foreign bribery and corruption and all the other things that he's guilty of. And that sounds perfect. But remember what the Biden White House's defense was, that he was out of sorts, that President Biden was out of sorts during this interview by Robert Hur, because it was right after the October 7th attacks, Hamas attacks on Israel, the worst terrorism imaginable. And you would think, okay, if a world crisis puts you out of your mental sorts and you're not up to the job because of a crisis, then you probably shouldn't be the president of the United States. You want the president of the United States to be his sharpest when there's a crisis, not that he needs to, go to a mental hospital because he can't handle the stress.
Yeah, I mean, but even beyond that, I mean, how often has the DOJ just decided not to charge someone because they're too senile? That doesn't seem like it's a regular occurrence.
Well, and that's just the issue. He wasn't senile when he took the documents, presumably when he stole them as a senator, and when he stole them when he left the vice presidency, right? What Robert Hur was trying to do was come up with a political excuse not to recommend the indictment of Joe Biden. They should have took that as a gift in the Biden White House, and instead they're attacking Robert Hur, saying he's somehow a political actor who's out to get them when he has protected Joe Biden by coming to the conclusion that Joe Biden almost certainly committed the crime of espionage, but they're not going to charge him because he's a lovable, demented criminal.
Yeah, I mean, the mental gymnastics it takes to sort of satisfy the Democrats, they really get to have their cake and eat it too. But earlier today, we also learned my father is petitioning the Supreme Court to stay the D.C. Circuit ruling, the issue of presidential immunity. Can you lay out what presidential immunity is to those watching, the details of this and the scope of the law with what's going on there? Because that one seems crazy. I mean, I think he should also simultaneously petition to end his documents case because unlike Joe Biden, he didn't have a recurring thing. He had the ability to declassify. It was under actual lock and key, not under, Hunter's supervision. I mean, it seems like that's one of the lawfare cases that they've really shot a big hole in. But the presidential immunity one is also really big, and it seemed like the Supreme Court wasn't having any of it last week.
Yeah, so we have the separation of powers, and we have government immunity for the different branches. Members of Congress, through the speech or debate clause in the Constitution, are immune from both civil and criminal prosecution for their official acts, not their private acts, their official acts, including the outer perimeter of their official acts under Supreme Court case law. Federal judges have both civil and criminal immunity for their official acts. Presidents right now have civil immunity because the Supreme Court has never had to decide whether presidents have criminal immunity, because no former president has ever been charged with any crime until Biden and these Democrat prosecutors brought these 4 bogus indictments against Trump for non-crime. So now the Supreme Court of the United States is going to have to decide this case. And this is so much bigger than President Trump, right? There's not going to be a Trump derangement syndrome exception here, because think about what they're saying, that a president, a successor, a president of the United States can indict his predecessor for his official acts, right? That is how our country will fall apart. If a president of the United States fears doing his job, doing his official acts because he's worried that his successor is going to indict him for doing his job, the presidency is going to be destroyed. And let me give you I'll give you two examples. Number one, President Obama ordered an extrajudicial drone strike on two American citizens, including a 17-year-old. He got legal advice from David Barron, his head of the Office of Legal Counsel at the Justice Department at the time, who said, yes, President Obama, you can order this extrajudicial drone strike of these two American citizens. David Barron is now Judge David Barron on the First Circuit Court of Appeals in Boston, a federal appellate court in Boston. Does this mean if presidents are not immune from criminal prosecution for their official acts, that the Trump 47 Justice Department can indict President Obama and Judge David Barron for capital murder for ordering the extrajudicial drone strike on two American citizens, killing them? Let me give you another example. You have President Joe Biden and his DHS Secretary Mayorkas ignoring federal immigration law. They have a duty to detain these migrants who are coming into our country, and they are mass releasing these migrants illegally in violation of federal law into our country. They know that these migrants are dangerous. Some of them are dangerous. They know that they're unvetted. So when these migrants get mass released into the country, if they rape someone, if they murder someone, if they kidnap someone, that's the natural and probable consequence of releasing dangerous, unvetted migrants from dangerous places into our country. Does that mean the Trump 47 Justice Department can prosecute President Biden and DHS Secretary Mayorkas for the crimes that result from their illegal acts of mass releasing these migrants into the country? Do the Democrats really want to go down this path? Do they want to play this game?
Because if they do, listen, Joe Biden, in terms of the crimes and in just the border, imagine how many people have died of fentanyl that came across the border that could have been this. You mentioned, obviously, the rape and the people that died on the journey over there because they keep promising these, the false hope. It's truly, they've created a humanitarian crisis, the scale of which, North America certainly hasn't seen in a really long period of time, and that's all 100% on them. So, if they continue to push this one, it certainly makes the case that you would go after them because this is insane.
Yeah, do the Democrats really want to go down this path? Because it looks very likely that President Trump is going to win on November 5th, 2024, and he will be the president on January 20th, 2025. Do they want to go down this path? Do they want the Trump 47 Justice Department indicting President Obama and Judge David Barron for capital murder? Do they want the Trump 47 Justice Department indicting President Obama for fentanyl deaths in America? Do they want the Trump 47 Justice Department indicting George W. Bush for lying about the weapons of mass destruction and the resulting war? Do we really?
You know what? I may actually want this to happen now. It's not great for my dad, but in terms of going after bad politicians, it's probably good. But no, all kidding aside, I understand it would make it impossible for anyone to make the tough decisions that you actually have to make as president. Now, I'd say in the case of Trump and Republicans in general, it's about protecting America. In the case of, the Obamas and the Bidens, it's about actually, destroying America. I can't think of any other reason for half of their actions at this point. I always say, if you were trying to destroy America from within, what would you do differently than today's Democrat Party policies? And the answer is nothing. You just keep doing the exact same thing, which should scare all of us. But, that's a matter of fact at this point.
Yeah, this is why the Supreme Court is going to have to take this case like the Supreme Court took the Nixon civil case back in 80 and 81, and decided after the regular process, oral argument, briefing, the regular process, they decided that presidents are immune from civil prosecution for their official acts. The Supreme Court needs to do the same thing here through the regular process. I don't know how the Biden Justice Department and Jack Smith can turn around and argue right now that the Supreme Court should not take this case from the DC Circuit, when back in December, the Biden Justice Department, including Biden Special Counsel Jack Smith, went to the Supreme Court and made this extraordinary request that the Supreme Court should skip the DC Circuit and take this case because it's so important that the Supreme Court has to resolve this case. That they can't change their position The Supreme Court is going to have to take this case. I don't know how they can get this case heard and decided before the presidential election if they go through the normal process. And frankly, they don't need to decide this case before the presidential election, because the election results should not matter whether the Supreme Court takes this case or not. The Supreme Court should follow the normal appellate procedures and process to depoliticize this case.
All right, so it seems like we're ending up at the Supreme Court quite a bit. I know last week you were there. You were at the Supreme Court in front. You were talking about the Colorado case, which is the case to kick my father off the presidential ballot there. How did that go? What's the inside baseball? How did you think, for those who haven't been following it as closely? Because obviously, that's a pretty big one where the Democrats seem to just flagrantly disregard law, precedent, just about everything that they claim they believe in.
I've been following this case very closely. I was at the 5-day trial at the Denver District Court. I was at the Colorado Supreme Court for that oral argument. I was at the U.S. Supreme Court on Thursday for that argument. I thought this would be a 6-3 case because it's so obvious under controlling precedent, the Griffin's case from 150 years ago, that if you want to disqualify an office holder from holding office under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment passed after the Civil War to chase out Confederate insurrectionists who were undermining the post-Civil War Reconstruction effort in the Union, Congress has to pass a federal criminal statute, which Congress has done. It's been on the books for over 150 years, last updated in 1948. You have to bring a federal grand jury has to bring federal criminal charges for insurrection or rebellion under the specific federal criminal statute with a disqualification provision. A federal jury has to unanimously find guilt with evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. A federal judge has to convict. That conviction must be upheld on appeal. That is the only way you can remove an office holder under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So I thought going into this case, it should be a 9-0 case, but I thought the 3 Democrat appointees on the Supreme Court would be so partisan that they would not go along with this. President Trump's attorney went into that Supreme Court hearing and decimated the other side, decimated the opposing, the anti-Trump forces. And by the end of the oral argument, it sounds like Justice Elena Kagan and even Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson are going to side with President Trump on this case. Justice Sotomayor, I always compare, I like Justice Sotomayor. She's like my lovable, crazy aunt who's just wrong on everything, but you still love her. I think this is going to be an 8-1 case, maybe 9-0, but it's certainly going to be more than 6-3. And this shows that the Democrats, lawfare and election interference, they are so stupid with this. They can't just focus on their strongest cases. They just take all the food and throw it against the wall and see what sticks, and it undermines their credibility at the Supreme Court, right? It's going to destroy their credibility with these justices who could have been gettable on some of these cases, like the Chief Justice. I think that with this lawfare and election interference and the games that they're playing, they're going to turn away these votes that could have been gettable for the Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that's a big part. If they just picked something that was good instead of, the nonsense, instead of the, we'll get back to Fani Willis again, it's so flagrant. They're getting caught. You just know all the people they're grifting. It's a big joke. It's just like, let's just throw a bunch of stuff at a wall and hope something sticks. That one's it just never seems to end. But what do you think? I mean, we talked about it a little bit. What's going to happen in Atlanta with Fani Willis? I mean, is she going to face any consequences for this? I mean, giving her lover hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars, having someone who's never tried anything criminally come in there, and then having a relationship and using the taxpayer funds that he's earned from this and meeting with it. I mean, a Georgia state judge today did confirm that he will hold an evidentiary hearing on Thursday over the evidence that Willis engaged in an improper affair. But is that enough? Or again, do you have to get the governor to be involved? I mean, are there other systems in place, that you can sort of circumvent, the rhinos and just have this be done in the judicial sense?
It sounds like this judge is going to disqualify Fani Willis and her boyfriend, Nathan Wade. Frankly, he needs to throw out the entire case And if a new prosecutor brought in wants to bring this new case, they're going to have to start over. But I imagine that any sane prosecutor from outside of Fulton County, Georgia, would look at this case and see that a RICO case against a president and 18 co-defendants for the non-crime of objecting to a presidential election, which is allowed by the Electoral Count Act of 1887. Democrats objected to Republican wins in 1968, 2004, 2000, 1968, 2000, 2004, and 2016. We don't see criminal charges against Hillary and Al Gore and John Kerry for their objecting to Republican wins. I think any rational prosecutor would not pursue these charges if the judge does the right thing here and disqualifies Fani Willis and Nathan Wade from this case and dismisses the case. And, that I think this case is going to go away. Here's the problem for Fani Willis. She has a financial interest in the outcome of this criminal case, which is absolutely illegal for a prosecutor to have a financial interest in the outcome of a criminal case. And so she has tainted the case from the beginning because she hired her boyfriend, and she acknowledges that it was her secret boyfriend before he brought his indictment. So she claims that she had this relationship after she hired him, but before the indictment. But regardless, before she sought this indictment, it was her boyfriend, and she was taking these illegal kickbacks from him, from this $250 an hour, $700,000 that she paid him in the form of these lavish trips. Fanny's toast.
So, I don't know if you saw this from my intro, but Hawaii's Supreme Court said that the spirit of aloha basically overrides the Second Amendment. Is this something that you studied in law school? I'm no lawyer, but, I took plenty of real estate law and stuff like that at Wharton. And this is not something that came up in that the spirit of aloha can somehow override the United States Constitution and our Second Amendment. I mean, what's going on here?
No, I unfortunately I didn't smoke weed in law school, so I didn't have this spirit of aloha in my head on this thing. I mean, what the Hawaii Supreme Court has done here is just unbelievably illegal and unconstitutional, and frankly dangerous. That they can say that the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is the same as the Second Amendment to the Hawaii Constitution, but we're not going to follow the Supreme Court's decisions on the Second Amendment, including the Bruin decision, because as a state Supreme Court, we think that the U.S. Supreme Court, the Supreme, that decides the supreme law, then we think the Supreme Court got it wrong, so we're not going to follow the Supreme Court of the United States. That is not how it works under our Republican form of government in the United States. And what the Supreme Court will probably do here very quickly is you're going to probably see a 9-0 decision by the Supreme Court. It's called a GVR, grant vacate and reverse, and they'll just do it summarily without oral argument, without without deciding on the merits. They will just slap down the Hawaii Supreme Court quickly and immediately.
Okay, so as I said in my intro, you'd be a choice for me for Attorney General, but you've said you'd have a hard time getting confirmed as AG. But if you're put in the temporary position, give us the day one agenda for how we get things back on track, how we put sanity back into, get into the sort of nuts and bolts of how that works and how you take sort of a wrecking ball to the corruption that's become so manifest in Washington.
Well, I like you said, I can't get confirmed as Attorney General. I would get one charity vote from Chuck Grassley, my former boss, and it would end his 60-plus year political career. So I'm not going to do that to Chuck Grassley. I'll tell my former boss not to worry about that. But if I were the acting Attorney General for a day, I think what needs to happen at the Justice Department is they need to clean house. And they need to clean house at these litigating divisions in Main Justice, and they need to clean house in the FBI especially, which is the FBI doesn't think they report to the Deputy Attorney General or the Attorney General, but they do. And so what I think needs to happen is they need to fire the top 3 layers of at least the top 3 layers of the FBI, including, so at the FBI, the director is the only political appointee. He's supposed to have up to a 10-year term. He doesn't get a 10-year term. The whole point of that up to a 10-year term is you don't want these FBI directors getting in there and having too much power in this this agency that's too insulated. So I would fire the FBI director. I would fire the deputy FBI director. I would fire the assistant directors, including the assistant directors in charge of each of the field offices, the big field offices like the Washington field office and the New York field office. And I would, if they don't want to get fired, if they want to claim civil service protection, I would reassign them to the southern border where they would work with Border Patrol to change diapers, right? And so that's what I would do at the FBI. At Main Justice, I would do the same thing, and the various litigating divisions, including the key sections, like the National Security Division. I would clean house of the leadership of the National Security Division. The criminal division, I would clean house. The civil division, I would clean house. I would get rid of all of these chiefs and assistant chiefs of these various sections, and I would make them reapply for their jobs. And in the meantime, they would get reassigned to the southern border prosecuting cases or changing diapers, whatever they need them to do.
So is that mostly a problem at Main Justice, or is it a problem at the U.S. Attorney's offices across the country? I mean, is it just as bad there? Where's the rot?
Well, I guess you're right in the sense that there is definite rot in the D.C. U.S. Attorney's office. That has been filled with political operatives, and they need to be reassigned. They are considered Schedule A as these assistant U.S. attorneys. They don't have the job security as career civil servants do throughout the rest of the country. So what I would do with the U.S. Attorney's Office, like with Main Justice, like with the FBI, is I would make them all reapply for their jobs. And in the meantime, I would reassign them to the southern border.
Listen, I think that would be a that would be a welcome change, and I'm sure the Border Patrol people could use the help, although I'm not sure that these people would be all that helpful at anything. It seems like they're much better at just being bureaucrats than actually doing anything, but I think that's definitely a good start. So, Mike, as this stuff progresses and as we start talking more about, some of these cases coming in, definitely have to have you back on there. Definitely want to make sure that we have a long-term, a temporary attorney general in you, just to, just if only as a shot across the bow. So really appreciate you always. Why don't you let everyone know where they can find you, where they can follow you, about the Article 3 project and everything that you're doing? Because again, a lot of the comment, hey, what can we actually do? You're one of the guys actually in the arena doing it. Let these guys know.
First of all, Don, I would say this. I'm not going to be the Attorney General. I want to be Trump's viceroy of DC, and I will clean up crime in DC overnight. There will be no more carjackings and rapes and murders. I will scare the hell out of criminals in one day. But anyway, so you can find us at article3project.org, article number 3project.org. You can donate there.
Excellent. Well, guys, Mike's always on point. Check him out there. Mike, thank you so much for joining. As always, awesome insight. Really appreciate it. And again, I know we're going to be going to a lot in the next 10 months because they're simply losing their minds, and they're going to continue with the lawfare. So